Forgetting to say who's going to be. Okay, now we're recording. And we ask you to submit questions and comments through the chat feature. We will be keeping track of that and we'll try to answer them as they come up, but we'll also circle back to those at the end when we open it up for general questions. And please give your name and affiliation, because that would help us understand your particular needs. Amy? Okay, our team. I am Martha Sapp, as I said, Director of Green Acres, and Elizabeth Dragon, our Assistant Commissioner, is not here during the meeting, but she sends her regards. And Green Acres was recently had a reorganization, and we have been placed under a group called Community Investment and Economic Revitalization, which is very cool. And so we're still doing exactly what we do. We just had a slight reorganization. I'm also happy to introduce Cecile Murphy, who will lead the majority of this presentation. And as of January 1st, she is the new Chief of the Bureau of Local and Nonprofit Assistance. So yay. For those of you who have Cecile as your project manager, pouty face, you will lose her eventually, but the whole state will gain her as an advocate for your open space and park development projects. And also Amy Savosky is behind the scenes turning the slides, but the three of us, we called ourselves the Three Musketeers because we buried ourselves in all the improvements that we're going to be announcing today and that we're going through. But we have a lot of other project managers in the meeting right now, people you may know or not know, but they're listening in. They want to hear your questions as well. The Green Acre staff is nothing but dedicated to helping you. Amy? Okay, so quickly, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about what projects are eligible. If you're here for the synchronized swimming YouTube instructional video, you're in the wrong place. We are talking about park developments today. So that is park developments, Jake's Law, stewardship, and urban parks funded park developments as well. We're going to go through some changes that we introduced in some stakeholder meetings we had back in October, and then we put into our applications. We're going to give you tips on how to submit a better application, because again, we want you to be successful. And of course, we're here to answer your questions. So we have this workshop today. We had one this morning about acquisitions. We're having this one now. And then in February, we have two drop-in open houses, basically. We're going to be there during that time period. You can stop in and ask questions. You don't have to stay the whole time, but if you want to listen to other people's questions, that's fine too. But I want to stress that you can contact us outside of those meetings too. Those are just places that you know that if you're coming up with some, if you have some confusion or whatever, you can jump in those days. Okay, and now I'll turn the mic over to Cecile. Who is muted?
I did this morning as well. Okay, now that I'm not muted, I want to say thank you, Martha, and just to say thank you all for joining us. We have a great turnout, and I'm really excited that you're all here to learn more about the applications and how to be successful. And because that's what we all want. We want you to be successful in your applications. So I'm going to start by addressing that question of what is an eligible project, which for development project means what can we build? On the slide is the official definition of the kinds of projects we can fund from the legislation. Basically, you can build or rehabilitate pretty much any facility that will be used for conservation or outdoor recreation. So no indoor recreation facilities, anything that is concerning outdoor rec or conservation. So athletic complexes, passive parks, waterfront parks, trails, all of them. We also fund support facilities such as lighting, parking, even Wi-Fi. And we do fund some buildings. The building must be in support of outdoor recreation. And examples are restrooms, maintenance sheds, concession stands, those types of buildings. And I do want to note that while a project can include support facilities and those support buildings, to rank high enough to be successful, the primary focus needs to be recreation facilities. So, that can be a part of the project, but if it's the whole project, chances are the application will not be successful. Okay, so we recently made a lot of changes to our program. We're always looking to see if we can do a better job. We do tweaks every funding round that we have, but we recently decided to do a more in-depth review of the local nonprofit assistance program. When we did that, we identified a number of opportunities that we can do things better. We held 2 stakeholder meetings at the end of September where we presented the proposed changes and solicited comments, which we reviewed. And our final changes were incorporated into the application packages that you guys all have. And we're going over some of that information today in our workshops.
If
I want to start. Oh,
If I can
sure.
just say something, somebody has their hand raised and
Oh.
we can answer the question, but then if you could hold off, only because we might answer the question as you go along, but let's get this question answered. And then you can also put questions in the chat. We'll answer them there and then also read them to the group afterwards. So Frank, did you want to ask your question quickly? And then we'll get to. You're muted.
Okay, you listed lighting, parking, and Wi-Fi, watering systems for vegetation in these parks. Is that covered?
Yes,
Yes.
irrigation is covered. That
Yep.
is in support of.
Thank you. I have other questions, but that's later.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to start talking about our changes with the most exciting ones, which are the new funding opportunities available this round. First, as part of our focus on environmental justice, we are happy to announce preferential funding for projects located in or easily accessible from adversely stressed, overburdened communities. Now, that is a particular phrase with a particular definition. Adversely stressed, overburdened communities are census blocks. So they're not full municipalities, they're census blocks that have experienced a greater than average burden of environmental and public health stressors. Some examples of these are air pollution, contaminated sites, solid waste facilities, sources of water pollution, things that contribute to making that area in need of environmental justice. We have this round, any approved Green Acres acquisition or park development projects that are located in one of these areas, so in an adversely stressed, overburdened community, or easily accessible from one of those communities, will receive an increase in their grant ratio of 25%. For example, a project that would previously have been eligible only for loan funding, for example, if it's located in a standard municipality, if the project was located in an adversely stressed, overburdened community in that area, then it would be eligible for 25% grant funding. A project that previously would have gotten 25% grant will get 50%, and so on. As I mentioned, it's Green Acres acquisition and park development projects. And just to review what easily accessible means, it has a very specific definition. Again, it's less than a quarter mile away with no barriers to pedestrian access. So no highways blocking people's ability to walk to the park. Now, specific definitions for all of these terms are in our application, and we encourage you all to look at the department's Environmental Justice Office website, which gives a great overview of the topic in general for reference. This map provides a visual of the eligible communities. The dark green municipalities are those that contain at least one adversely stressed, overburdened community. There is a list of these communities in the back of the application package. So we recommend you go look at that list if you have a question whether your community has one of these adversely stressed, overburdened communities in it. I have to stress that just because your community is on the list does not mean that any project in your municipality is eligible for the extra grant funding. The project must be located in the adversely stressed, overburdened community census block in that community. And to save my voice, I'm going to stop saying overburdened community and just say OBC. So adversely stressed OBC. Okay, our second new funding round opportunity that we're very excited about this round is the Jake's Law Playground funding program. Accessibility has always been a concern for us, and all of our parks are required to meet ADA requirements. But Jake's Law, passed by the legislature, and the recently released Department of Community Affairs regulations inspired us to create this new program, which is going to provide 75% grants for counties to build completely inclusive playgrounds. We anticipate that the awards will be between $750,000 and $1 million, and the amount is going to depend on demand for the program. It's not a competitive program. All complete applications from eligible applicants will be approved and funded. We've tried to streamline our application for this program and make it easier to apply. And the applications do not count towards the limit on the number of requests, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It's a pilot program, so it really may just be for this round only. We're not sure yet. So we are really encouraging all of our county partners to apply and build one of these playgrounds in their county. I want to review some of the requirements for the funding. As I mentioned, the applications have to come from county governments. We encourage you to partner. A nonprofit or a municipality can partner with the county to help prepare the application and do some of the legwork, but the application itself must come from the county government. It also must be located on county-owned parkland. There is one exception to this. The land can be leased to the county, but the facility itself must be identified as a county facility, both at the site and on the county's website. The playground must be constructed in accordance with DCA regulations for completely inclusive playgrounds. There are very specific requirements for these playgrounds, and they're all laid out very clearly in the regulations. They're not written in technical language, very easy to read. And there's a link to the regulations in the Jake's Law application. So please review those when designing your project, so you know exactly what types of facilities details need to be incorporated. The project scope for Jake's Law projects is limited to improvements that are part of or directly in support of the completely inclusive playground. Let's say that you have a large park and you want to do a number of improvements to it, and one of those improvements is the completely inclusive playground. What we encourage you to do is submit one application for the Jake's Law and submit a park development application separately for the other improvements at the park. And that park development application will be part of a competitive round. All right, next we're going to talk about some changes to the application package that affect all of our programs. The first of which is expanded requirements for public engagement. As part of our reassessment, we identified the need for a renewed focus on public outreach and planning. And this was in part, or in large part, because we'd received a number of complaints from the public about a lack of community involvement, particularly in local government applications. We have had a longstanding requirement to hold a public hearing, but now we're asking applicants to have meaningful public engagement during the project planning stage. So in this way, you're not just telling folks about your plans at the hearing, you're asking for their input while you're making your plans. So in this way, doing meaningful public engagement like that, it helps ensure that people have input on how their tax dollars are spent, which I think we can all agree is a good thing. And it also results in better projects, ones that closely match the needs and priorities of the communities that the park is going to serve. And finally, our experience has shown that if you don't involve the public early on, it can lead to situations where a project is approved by Green Acres, and then after approval, public awareness grows about the project, and ultimately public opposition causes the applicant to withdraw the project, which that ends up wasting applicants' time and money, and we all want to avoid that. We had about 2 or 3 of those in our last application round, and it was a disappointment, I think, both to the applicants and the residents. And we want everybody on board from the get-go, or at least aware And this is a good way to do it. We're not telling you how to engage the public. You're free to use whatever methods that you feel will most actively engage your community. In the application, there's a list of ideas of how to solicit public input, which I've included here. And it ranges from paper surveys to design charrettes. It really runs the gamut. You, again, are the best ones to figure out what is going to work best in your community, but we encourage you to get the word out as best you can. And those who attended our stakeholder meetings will recognize this example of the kind of valuable input the public can contribute. And I hope you can all see the roller coaster up at the top there. Okay. So through the years, we've also had numerous questions about our public hearing requirements. To address these, we want to be really clear. We want our applicants not to have, to be able to look in the application package and look in our materials and really know exactly what they need to do. So with that in mind, and also because we want to further increase public awareness and involvement, we've made some changes to the application and the public hearing requirements. Some of these changes we hope will make things easier for you guys. For example, we have added a new requirement that the public notice for the public hearing is posted on your website. And that needs to be done 15 days ahead. The newspaper ad still has to be published, but that now only has to be published 48 hours ahead. This slide shows the new and updated requirements for the notice part of the public hearing requirements. And these are also listed in the application. If you have questions about these, we can talk about them at the end. I'm not going to go through them one by one because they're pretty clearly laid out in the application. But again, if you have questions at the end, just let us know. Okay, this slide lists requirements for the hearing itself and for the submission of the meeting minutes. Again, these are in the application, so I'm not going to go one by one, but I do want to make a few notes. The first one, that the public hearing must be held in the evening, 6 p.m. or later. And I just want to note that for those of you who have governing body meetings that start before 6 o'clock, like let's say your starts at 5, that's fine, as long as the hearing itself is at 6 o'clock or later. And we ask that the times for both the beginning of the meeting and the beginning of the hearing are included in the notice. That's a question we've gotten quite a bit. I see a hand up. Martha, do you want to take that question, or? Martha? Oh.
Yes, Ocean County.
I have a question regarding the quorum of the governing body.
Yes.
So if we have our normal commissioners meetings in Tom's River, we're at 4 o'clock, and the project that we're proposing is in Lacey Township, and our meeting has to be in the town where the project's being done, how do we complete that?
We don't actually have a requirement that the meeting is in the town where the project is taking place.
Especially now that many of them are held virtually. No, for a county government, you hold it where you normally hold. You'll have to notify the town that you're doing a project in their town, but we'll get to that later. But the meeting, you can hold your regular meeting at your meeting as you need to, just at the right time.
Okay, so as long as it's brought up at one of our commissioners' meetings and approved upon, then we'll be okay?
If it meets all the requirements in the public hearing notice that we have in our application, yes.
Okay, unfortunately, our meeting's at 4 o'clock, not 6 o'clock. That's not going to be an issue.
It will be an issue.
Oh.
Can you hold the hearing at 6 o'clock?
We could, but we're not going to have a quorum of the governing body at that point.
Well, let's talk offline about that. But generally, we've had a lot of pushback from the public that there are meetings that are held while they're at work, and so that's why we pushed it to 6 o'clock after many years of receiving complaints. So let's talk about it. You can reach out to me later. This is Martha. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Martha.
Okay, so just a couple other notes about the public hearing and minutes. In terms of the minutes, transcripts are fine, but no video or audio submissions are allowed. And finally, for urban parks projects, I'm going to talk about this a little later on, but urban parks applicants have the option of requesting that their application be rolled over into the normal Green Acres round. And if that is something that the applicant is going to pursue, that needs to be mentioned at the public hearing. Okay, one of the biggest changes we're making this year is that applicants must submit complete applications or supplemental funding requests by the deadline, March 1st at 5 p.m. All application materials must be submitted by this date. If the submissions checklist does not specifically call out an item as possibly not applicable or as optional, it must be submitted for the application to be complete. And this includes public hearing minutes. In the past, we have been flexible. We've given people a little bit of slack. If they had their meeting before the deadline, we allowed them to submit the minutes afterwards. But this round, we are under a very tight time frame for application review and approval. And so we just we can't give our applicants leeway. Everything must be due and submitted by the deadline, March 1st at 5 o'clock. We are encouraging applicants to work backwards, figure out the date of the governing body meeting first, and then figure out when everything else has to be done in order to be ready for that meeting.
I just want to add here that it may sound silly to say that you have to submit a complete application, but we have been, over the years, very flexible and patient. And when some things are missing, we reach back out, ask for them, it goes back and forth, and it really delays things. So we really have to hold firm this year and require that all the required documents be submitted by the deadline. Thanks.
Thanks, Martha. With the exception of Jake's Law, we expect that all of our programs this round are going to be competitive. There will be projects that do or don't get funded based on a difference of as little as 1 point. We want you to be successful. So in our application, we have outlined our priorities, which I've listed here, and we've included suggestions of how to design your project to incorporate them. I'm not going to go over the priorities one by one, but the application does a great job in describing each of them and talking about how you might, different elements that you might incorporate. The degree to which a given project incorporates each of the priorities is going to vary because every project's different, but higher ranking projects will be those that demonstrate consistency with these priorities. Just to give one example of this, the public recreation benefits. If we receive a project that has one ball field, and then there's another project that has a ball field, a tot lot, and pickleball courts, that variety of recreation opportunities in the second project is going to increase its ranking because not only is it a variety of user groups, it's also a variety of demographic groups. So that's the sort of thing that we're going to be looking for. And again, all of this information is in the application. To ensure that our ranking system closely reflects these priorities, we've made some tweaks to it this round. For example, projects are going to get additional points if they promote climate resilience, or if they are located within an adversely stressed OBC, or if the municipality has a DEP-approved public access plan, which is the plan for increasing public access to tidally flowed waters. We've also made some changes for our nonprofit applicants. We've made these changes to help ensure that the nonprofits we fund are qualifying nonprofits that are in compliance with nonprofit laws and regulations, and that they have sufficient capacity to manage the proposed project. We unfortunately have had a number of applications from nonprofits that have ended up being one-man shows, just one person doing all the work, and that, people can have a lot of passion, but that passion doesn't necessarily translate into getting a project closed. So we are we've created this new nonprofit eligibility certification. It replaces some of the previously required items, and it requires some attachments. The first two are website printouts from the IRS and regarding the New Jersey Charitable Registration and Investigation Act. And we have prepared some guides for both our staff and you to go through and step-by-step detailed guides on how to obtain those website printouts. Of course, we're always happy to answer any questions, and so let us know if you have any questions about those. There are additional changes to the application package that affect Green Acres and urban park development projects, as well as the stewardship and Jake's Law. The first one is that park development projects must be limited to one park location. Multiple park projects have been allowed in recent rounds, but when we stepped back and took a look, only one of them out of 29 has ended up building more than one park during the project period. This skews our rankings because applicants end up getting points for parks that they don't end up constructing. So we want to make the process fairer, and we want to, help people focus on one park at a time. We have very regular funding rounds, and so we encourage folks to do your park and then come back in the next round for your next park. The second change that I'm going to talk about here is that we are no longer allowing major scope changes to a project after approval. And this is in large part for the same reason, that it skews the ranking because the project that gets ranked is not the project that gets funded. So we want to make sure that our process is transparent and that it's fair, and these changes are going to help ensure that. Another change affecting park development projects is an expanded focus on tree removal, which stems from a couple of developments. First, our park development projects need to support the state's climate resilience efforts, and trees are a very important part of carbon sequestration, and we don't want our park development funding to be counteracting the state's efforts. Second, we have also received an increasing number of expressions of public concern and complaints about tree removal in Green Acres funded projects. As part of this focus, we are asking applicants to provide detailed information about proposed tree removals in the part of the application that's called the environmental impact assessment. And that information is listed on the slide. And we are also asking that these projects follow municipal tree ordinances, even if they're otherwise exempt. Projects that propose significant tree removal will not be approved for funding. So we're not saying you can't remove trees, but public engagement is very important. And the project just might not be a good fit for our funding in certain circumstances. This round, we're also asking for additional information for park development projects that include synthetic turf fields. Synthetic turf fields is an issue that periodically comes to the forefront, and each time it does, we ask our DEP's Division of Science and Research to review all of the available research so that we know that we're on top of everything. And based on their findings, we are going to continue to fund synthetic turf fields, but we're also going to require applicants to conduct a thorough review of due diligence considerations. And I've listed some of those on the slide. Applicants will then need to share this review and a discussion of the alternatives, which is natural turf, with the public to ensure transparency and public engagement. The bottom line with synthetic turf is we're going to approve both synthetic and natural turf fields, but we want you to do your due diligence and talk to the public, be upfront about your choice. We've also made changes to our stewardship program this round. Stewardship is the program that funds natural resource restoration. The primary purpose of the change is to refocus the program on the creation, restoration, and protection of natural resources and historic landscapes. We particularly wanted to clarify which improvements are eligible for stewardship funding because there's been a lot of confusion about that. And we've broken them down into two groups. The first group are automatically eligible improvements. These are improvements that create, restore, or protect natural resources, such as wetlands, meadows, and woodlands. And the other automatically eligible group of improvements are historic landscape restoration improvements for properties that are listed on the New Jersey or federal historic registers. The second category of improvements that are eligible are conditionally eligible improvements. These are ancillary improvements for environmental education, nature observation, and public access. Examples of these include nature trails and interpretive signage. These improvements must be part of a larger project that includes the automatically eligible improvements, and they're subject to a cap. We cannot stress enough that folks need to reach out to your Green Acres contact if you're thinking of doing a stewardship project to confirm eligibility of the improvements you're thinking about and to review funding, because the cap can be a little confusing. So we want you to reach out so that you really know what we will fund and how much we will fund. Finally, I just want to mention a number of the changes that I talked about earlier are also applicable to stewardship projects. No multi-park projects, no major scope changes, and the tree removal policy is applicable to stewardship projects as well. And as a reminder, all Green Acres funded projects must be ADA compliant and provide meaningful public access. Okay, now the last program that we've made changes to this round is the Urban Parks program. This is the program that was established through a budget set aside by the legislature. The first round of Urban Parks funding was in 2021. So this is our second round of Urban Parks. The biggest change that we made to the program this year was eligibility. And this was made mostly because we found the first round, we had so many applications and so few of them actually got funded that we wanted to narrow the eligibility to those applications that really stood a chance of getting funded. And basically we looked at what got funded and these are the projects that did get funded. And so our eligibility this round is projects must be located in or easily accessible from an adversely stressed, overburdened community. Remember, I talked about that earlier. And this time for the Urban Parks projects, that adversely stressed OBC must be located within an urban aid municipality. Urban aid municipalities are designated by DCA, and there's a list in the back of the application packages of the urban aid municipalities. In the back of the Urban Parks projects, there is the list of 59 eligible municipalities. The counties can also apply as long as their project is located in those municipalities. And again, it has to be located in or accessible from an adversely stressed OBC. The second major change we made was that if you apply to Urban Parks, you can request that if the Urban Parks application is unsuccessful, meaning it doesn't get any funding from Urban Parks, or underfunded, it gets some money but not enough, you can request that that application is rolled over to the Green Acres round. So in this way, the same project can get submitted to Urban Parks and Green Acres. The difference this round is that the Green Acres submission will then count as your one Green Acres request. The good news is that if that Green Acres request is approved, then it is eligible for 100% grant funding. And again, a reminder that as with our other projects, meaningful public access must be provided to the project site. And this is the same map I showed before. And the eligible communities for this topic, for this program, are those dark green municipalities that are outlined in red. So those are municipalities that contain at least one adversely stressed OBC, so they're dark green, and they're urban aid municipalities, so they're outlined in red. And again, the list of eligible locations is in the application. And I'm going to be a broken record here. Only 59 municipalities and county governments can apply for this funding. And they can only apply for a project that's located in or easily accessible from an adversely stressed, overburdened community that's within those 59 municipalities. I want to be really clear about this, so forgive me for being repetitive. I want to make sure that the applications we get are eligible applications. And if you have any question, please reach out and we will help you figure it out. Okay, I'm going to summarize the 2023 funding round options and limits. We have 4 categories. There's traditional green acres, which are acquisition projects, park development projects, and those urban parks rollover requests that I mentioned. There's stewardship, Jake's Law for counties, and urban parks. And applicants can make one request under each of those programs. And when I say request, I mean either a new application or a supplemental funding request. This is a chart from our application package, which outlines pretty much what I just talked about, but it also has that column that describes and has notes about eligibility. The changes from last round, which I've already discussed, are outlined in red. And you would use this chart to figure out which programs you're eligible for and how many applications and supplemental funding requests you can submit. To figure out which programs you're eligible for, the first thing you need to do is figure out what category of applicant are you. And the application package has definitions, section, and lists in the appendices that can help you figure that out. Or you can call us and we can help you figure it out. This chart, which is also in the application, this one's in the appendices, has the same information just in a different format, and it highlights the number of requests that can be submitted per type of applicant. So for example, if you're a non-urban aid municipality, you look over and you can see you can have a maximum number of 2 requests for this funding round, one through the traditional green acres and one through the stewardship. And it's, has the same information for the other types of applicants. I just want to make a few notes about supplemental funding requests. A lot of you have existing projects with us that you would like additional funding for. To request that funding, you have to submit a supplemental funding request form. And I just want to state that there are 2 versions now of the supplemental funding request form, one for acquisitions and one for everybody else. So make sure you've got the right version of the form. And it requires attachments. And you also want to make sure you have the right versions of the forms and the attachments. So we have a specific enabling resolution template for supplemental funding. And we also have, if you're a nonprofit, we have a specific nonprofit eligibility certification form for supplemental funding requests that's a little bit streamlined. As a note, urban parks projects are not eligible to request supplemental funding from the Urban Parks Program, but you can reach out to your Green Acres contact to discuss requesting additional funding through the Green Acres program. All right, this chart, which is also in the application package, talks about grant percentages. And it can be the first step in figuring out how much money your project might be awarded. We've made one change, which I talked about earlier, the adversely stressed, overburdened community percentages, and that's outlined in red. To figure out your grant percentage for your proposed project, it's a step process. So the first, again, you have to figure out what category applicant you are. Once you've done that, then you have to look at, is your proposed project located in an adversely stressed OBC? And this is a 2-part process. So first you check to see if your municipality is listed in the appendices as a municipality that contains an adversely stressed OBC. If your municipality is not listed, then the answer is no. If it is listed, then you have to go to the next step and do the mapping. There's detailed instructions in the appendices for how to do the mapping and look up the particular location of your proposed project. Again, if it seems a bit much and you're confused, just call us and we'll help you out. I also want to mention that in addition to grants, you can apply for loan funding for the match requirement. Loan funding is provided if available, and it's at a 2% interest for most applicants, except for urban aid projects, and then it's a 0% interest. This chart shows grant percentages for stewardship projects, Jake's Law projects, and urban park projects. Stewardship projects are a 50% grant unless they're located in an urban aid municipality, then they're 75. Jake's Law is 75% for those counties, and urban parks is 100%. Jake's Law projects can include a request for loan funding for the match requirement. Okay, so funding percentages may not tell the whole story, though, of how much money you're going to receive if your project is approved. In particular, more expensive projects may receive less than they're eligible for. Since demand for our funding is always bigger than supply, we cap our awards to try to get as many projects funded as we can. For Green Acres projects, the amount of the cap varies based on applicant type. And in the application package, there and under the funding round cap section, there is a chart that shows recent cap amounts for the different types of applicants. We encourage you strongly to look at that chart and figure out how much money you're likely to get. And again, if you have questions about that, call us. The Jake's Law program has a cap that we anticipate will be between $750,000 and $1 million. And again, that is going to vary based on demand. Well, it's not going to vary. We're going to choose that cap based on how many counties actually submit applications. The urban parks cap is $500,000. And one reason why we really are stressing the funding round caps is because we want applicants to design a project that reflects their likely award plus whatever funding they have available from other sources. Please do not apply for a project that will need funding from a subsequent Green Acres round in order to proceed. If it's a really expensive project, phase it, break it up into different phases and just apply for that first phase that can be fully funded by whatever funding is available plus the anticipated award from Green Acres. Okay, another change this funding round is that only projects deemed eligible will be ranked and compete for funding. The projects that aren't complete or for some other reason aren't eligible we'll stop looking at those immediately and move on. The application package lists circumstances that will lead to an application being disqualified. We've covered a few of them already, and we've highlighted a few more on the slide based on problems we often see. Signatures on the application are very important. It has to be signed by the same person who's authorized in the resolution. Quite often we have one person who signed the application, but the resolution doesn't authorize them. The resolution authorizes someone else. So please be very careful and make sure that that is consistent. This round, we have a new requirement that the chief financial officer sign the application. What they're signing is pretty limited in terms of what they're attesting to, but that signature needs to be part of the application. The public hearing and notice requirements, also very important. There's a checklist. Everything should be checked off on that checklist. And then I've included a few others here that we've run into over the years. Again, we want you to be successful. Our goal is that none of the applications are disqualified. So that's why we're providing this information and being as clear as possible. And again, we always encourage you to reach out if you have questions about any of it, because we have a conversation with you ahead of time than have a very unfortunate conversation with you afterwards. Okay, next. We've gone over the changes to the application based on our program reassessment. Now we're going to talk about some tips for the application submissions. There's a complete list of application submission tips in the application package. We strongly encourage that you read it. And I'm just going to go over a few of them here. So starting with the application form, there are some areas that need special attention. We have changed our project description question to be in a bullet form, and we ask you to address each of those bullet points. Don't leave any of them out, please. This is a problem we see all the time, is that the tax lots listed in the application don't match the tax maps or the concept plan. There's often a discrepancy. Often it's that the tax lots, only one of them is listed, but then you look at the concept plan and clearly there's bits of a few others on the edges. So please double check that information. We've always asked whether a property is historic, but this round we're asking you to look up whether the property is historic on the State Historic Preservation Office website on their GIS layer. There's very specific detailed instructions in the appendices for the applications on how to do that. And they actually have a great guide for using their GIS layer. So, but again, if it all seems too much or you're confused, reach out and we can help you with that as well. The public engagement documentation, there's a list of options for that in the application. And one thing that applicants, frequently get confused is the project cost figures and the request figures on the application form. And we will be the first to admit that, particularly now with all these different programs, some of our information can be confusing. There's lots of different funding percentages and lots of different types of projects. Please just reach out to us and say, this is what I think this is, and I think we can request this much. Is that accurate? And again, along those lines, there's a question on the application now of whether we've previously funded that facility. And, particularly for new employees, you probably have no idea. So, it's a pretty good idea if there's a Green Acre sign at the park, a permanent, Green Acre sign, but a lot of times it's not clear exactly what at the park was funded when that park got funding. So again, feel free to reach out and we will be happy. Okay, so the enabling resolution is another important submission that sometimes gets wonky. We provide a template. Please use it without changing it. Our lawyers have spent a lot of time making it exactly the way they like it, and so we would like you to use it that way. The amounts in the resolution, so the funding amounts, should match the funding amount and request amounts in the application form. Sometimes they're on different tracks, sometimes the municipality staff and the consultant who's preparing the application, sometimes they're sort of doing things at the same time and the numbers don't match. Please make sure they match. If there is a discrepancy, we're going to use the amounts in the resolution because those are the amounts that the governing body voted on. If it's a 100% grant project or a 100% loan project, the match should be listed as 0. I'm sorry, the loan amount should be listed as 0. That's also the case if you're applying and you just don't want a loan. All you're interested in is a grant. The match figure, so the amount that the applicant is going to be matching, must equal the total project cost minus the funding request. So there shouldn't be any gaps. If it's $1 million project and you're requesting $750, your number for the match needs to be $250. For example. And for urban parks, if you are planning on requesting a rollover, then 2 resolutions need to be submitted, one for the Urban Parks program and one for the Green Acres program. And there's templates for each of those in the application. The Green Acres resolution, since it's not clear whether or not the project will be funded by Urban Parks, the Green Acres resolution should list the amount requested, assuming that there is no Urban Parks funding. And you can tell in red, this is very important to us. We are happy to review draft resolutions. We've had a number of applicants take advantage of this, and it works really well every time. So please send them in. We'll let you know whether it is accurate, and then, you know, hopefully it'll all be good. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the recreation open space inventory. This is a requirement for municipalities and county governments, not for nonprofits. I'm going to start with the good news, which is we no longer require tax maps be submitted for the recreation open space inventory. On the flip side, we are tightening up our inventory submission requirements, as you can see by this list, which is also included in the application package. Applicants must use our Excel spreadsheet form. For a long time, we called it our new Excel spreadsheet form. It's not new. It's really old now. So we need to have everybody on board using that form. It can be intimidating at first glance, but it's really not that complicated. We're going to, you know, we encourage you to read the instructions, which are in the first tab of the spreadsheet form, which can be linked from the application, and also to reach out to your Green Acres contact if you have any questions at all. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I am going to highlight that the inventory has to be dated within the last 12 months. So if you've very recently done your inventory with us, yay, good for you, send it in. But if it's older than a year, we're going to need new signatures. For development, Jake's Law, and stewardship projects, the subject property, so the property on which you want to do your project, those lots have to be listed in the inventory. So please double check that. And this last one, we keep a database of, it's called the open space database, and it includes all of the lots that have been previously listed on a municipality or county's recreation and open space inventory. It is accessible through the DEP's OTPLA website. OTPLA, it stands for the Office of Transactions and Public Land Administration, and they are our previous Bureau of Legal Services and Stewardship. We've had a reorg, and so they became OTPLA. So the open space database that contains the listing of all of those blocks and lots is on their website. We encourage you to use it as a reference when you're preparing your recreation open space inventory submissions, but it is not an acceptable submission. Do not print out the, submit a printout from that website as the inventory. We need a signed inventory on the Excel spreadsheet form, and we appreciate very much you putting the work into making that happen. Just as an aside, urban parks applications do not require a recreation open space inventory submission unless they're going to be rolled over into the Green Acres program.
If I could just add one thing about the recreation open space inventory, which we'll call the ROSI. For those who have taken funding before, you understand what that is, but for anybody who's new, anytime a municipality or county accepts funding from us, they have to provide this list of any land they hold for recreation and conservation purposes. Doesn't mean we have funded it, but anything they hold at that time has to be on the list. And when you take funding from us, if it gets approved and we give you $1, we're going to put this as part of the contract, and you're going to record it. And that means that in perpetuity, the land that's on that ROSI is protected. So it came about because people at the beginning of the program wanted our funding to acquire land over on one side of town and sell parkland on the other side of town. And we said, no, our goal is a net increase in open space. So this guarantees that we'll just keep adding to the amount of recreation open space in the state and not ever have it go down. So this is a requirement just of municipal and county governments, not nonprofits. And as Cecile said, also not urban parks, because that's not technically Green Acres funding. Thank you.
Thanks, Martha. So for other submissions, I'm just going to throw out a few tips on these. Tree removal costs and site grading costs have to be broken out separately for the cost estimate. The concept plan, we've created a new checklist. Please complete and submit that checklist with your concept plan. And finally, a note about phased projects. So I was saying earlier, if you have an expensive project, break it up and just submit phase 1. If you do that, only include information in the project description and the project narrative about that phase 1, about the phase that's included in the cost estimate. It's great if it's part of a larger future effort and you can talk a bit about that. But when it comes down to addressing each of the priorities in the narrative, those priorities should be a discussion just about the phase that's being applied for. Okay, these are links to the sites that you can use to figure out if your project site is in an adversely stressed, overburdened community, and if your project site is historic. Also, there are the sites for the nonprofits to confirm if they are in compliance with the IRS and with the New Jersey Charitable Registration and Investigation Act. These are all in the application form, and each of these has a guide in the back of the application form that walks you through the process of getting that information. I've been talking for a while now, so I'm not going to go through each of these, but if anyone wants a demonstration of any of them during the Q&A, just let me know. Okay, we also wanted to give you an update on submitting your application. In our application materials, we asked you to submit using an email address. Emails have size limits for attachments, as I'm sure you all know, and last round, it sometimes took multiple emails to submit one application, which was, kind of a pain. So we're happy to say that we've figured out a way that this round you'll instead be able to submit applications through our website. Yay! Under the forms and regulations, there isn't currently, but we're working on it and it should be up within the next week or two. There will be a link to application form submissions. This is what it's going to look like. You use the drop-down menu under application to select the type of application that you're submitting. You fill out the requested information in the blank boxes, upload the files, and press submit, and voila. Okay, I realize we have covered a great deal of information in a really short period of time today. The application materials really cover most of these topics in detail, which is why they're so long. But we really tried to make them comprehensive and helpful and detailed. And so we encourage you to refer to them. You're also welcome to attend our upcoming Q&A session, which is on February 1st, and also the one on February 22nd, as Martha mentioned. Those are drop-in. You don't have to come and stay for the whole time. You can if you like, but you can also just drop in, ask a question, and go on with your day. And of course, please reach out to your project manager with questions, and you can figure out who to reach out to on our website. So go to njgreenacres.org and click on Contact Us with the beautiful red arrow that I worked very hard to put there. And it's not, the red arrow isn't on the website, but it just shows you where to click Contact Us. We're in the process of redoing this page on our website, but right now, to find the information, you scroll down until you hit Green Acres contact list. In the revised website page, which should be up in, again, a couple of weeks, there'll be tabs and you click on the local and nonprofit assistant tab. Then you look, your next step is to look under these columns and find the appropriate project manager. So this column is for acquisition projects. This column is for park development, stewardship, and Jake's Law. And most counties actually have different project managers who handle acquisition versus park development projects. So please make sure you've got the right person. If you don't, we'll forward it to the right person. And speaking of questions, we want to thank you for coming and take your questions now.
The chat has been active, so we'll go through those questions too, but let's go with the hands raised first. Kendall, you can unmute and ask your question.
Yes, Kendall Brunson, Township of Willingboro Recreation and Parks. So I know Willingboro, we are considered an urban aid area, and I earlier in the you mentioned we were able to apply for 3 different stewardship, urban aid, and what was the other?
Traditional Green Acres.
Traditional. So, and I know you mentioned the rollover as far as if we don't get funded for the urban aid, but so are we talking 3 separate applications? Or are we talking all in one is this combined in one application?
Okay, so there's an urban parks application. There's a Green Acres application. The park development project, portions of those projects applications are very, very similar. So you're not really doing double work. And the other one you mentioned was stewardship. That's a separate application as well, because it would be likely the stewardship is different than the facilities you're trying to fund are different in stewardship than they are in park development. So that's definitely a separate application. The urban parks, if you're going to do the urban parks and ask for it to be rolled over, you pretty much just need the extra resolution because the application is pretty much the same. But again, as you're planning this, I would definitely reach out to your project manager just to make sure that you are using the right form. But we're not asking you to do double work for urban parks rollovers to Green Acres.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah. If the township wanted to submit 3 different projects, they could, and that would be 3 different applications. But if the township just wants to submit one project that is going to be rolled over into the Green Acres to try to get funding from that pot as well, then that is just a check mark on the urban parks application, the extra resolution, and then and that's really it.
Yeah, I mean, the benefit of the urban parks funding is it's 100% grant funding, but in certain projects under our new funding categories, if you're doing some projects in urban aid, adversely stressed, overburdened communities, you could get up to 100% grant funding for Green Acres too. So we've really tried to increase the funding. And I just want to stress that we're not taking any money away from anybody else in the state. We fund projects statewide, rural, suburban, urban, everything. What we're trying to do is encourage projects in the areas where we think that people really deserve and need extra attention, extra mitigating and positive things because they've been suffering from a lot of these environmental stressors, health stressors where they live. So we're trying to give extra money there, but we certainly understand that, a lot of what Green Acres is about are the open space properties in the greener areas. So we're trying to still try to do it all. Okay. Eric, who isn't really Eric. And I'll let Cece answer.
Yes, sorry. Eric is really Wendy Mager, Friends of Princeton Open Space. So I put a question in the chat. I'll wait on that.
I'll let Cecile can answer that one. You can ask it. It's the 13% cap. It's 13% of construction for engineering. And is that 13% of the entirety or 13% of the 50% of 13%? And that's the part. I started to answer it and I thought my head was going to explode. So all the costs go into a total and we split it by 50%.
Okay, so I see the question here. So you're asking if you have a $100,000 ecological restoration stewardship project, all of which is eligible cost, does that mean all of which is construction or implementing the project plan?
Implementing the project.
Yeah, the cost of okay, can you get 13% of $100,000 for permanent engineering? The 13% is, so basically we pay 50% of the total project cost. Yeah. The total project cost includes all of the construction, all of the design and engineering up to 13% of construction, and then permitting costs and other eligible costs. And the costs are all in the application appendices. So in this case, if the only costs were the implementation costs plus the design and engineering, the total project cost would be $113,000, and we would pay 50% of that total.
Okay, I understand that. Now, the only engineering that we need is, we think we probably have to get a permit because some of the areas where we want to remove invasive species and plant native species are in wetlands. And so we have to have an engineering firm assist us with the permit application. So does that go into the engineering category, or does it go into the incidental category where you mentioned permits, which is subject to a lower percentage?
It's actually two.
Yeah, they goes into two categories.
Two
The
categories.
engineering for the permits goes under design and engineering. The actual cost of the permits, so DEP makes you write them a check. That cost goes under the permit costs, which don't have a limitation on them. There's no cap on the permitting costs.
Okay. Well, happily, they don't make you write a check for this permit. It's a general
Oh.
permit 16. So
That's lovely.
the other question is, you know, this project, as I say, it's an ecological restoration. So we're not actually constructing anything. We're not building anything. But there are a couple of requirements in the application, and I'm sorry I can't be more specific, that seem to require that you get an engineering professional to provide, you know, like a plan or a design, which I don't understand how that would apply to what we propose to do. And if you can't answer that because I haven't linked it to a specific provision, I'll call her.
Yeah, I do think.
If I may, Wendy's talking about the pre-construction engineering certification.
Yes.
And there's no construction that is happening with this ecological riparian project.
Well, we
Thank you.
consider,
Right.
we
You're
consider the
welcome.
construction to be the action. So yeah, let's talk offline, but because stewardship projects are very unique. A lot of them resemble park developments, but they're not. And that's why we tried to narrow them down to the actual natural resource type projects. And they don't necessarily fit into the same mold. So we can talk offline about the specifics of your stewardship project and some of these little anomalies. But
Thanks very much.
okay. Kendall Brunson? You're muted. You're asking a question.
I wonder if Kendall asked a question
no,
earlier.
you've already answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay,
Appreciate it.
Beth Portocalis?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. So generally, would cleaning up a creek to allow for water activities, canoeing, paddling, be an eligible project?
Yes, you mean like desnagging and
Yes.
making it passable, you know, boatable,
Yes.
canoeable? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we would ask that you tie it into the natural resources, because I mean, you're cleaning it up not just for the recreation use, but you're cleaning it up for natural resource restoration purposes. So that would be a prerequisite for the stewardship application. I mean, you could apply for park development. I don't know that it would rank very high if all it was desnagging a waterway, but for the stewardship side of things, you know, there does have to be a natural resource restoration or a historic landscape that kind of underpins the entire application.
So it is at a historic site. It's on the National and State Register, Kirby's Mill here in Medford. But then it just raises an interesting other question, because we just partnered with Green Acres on 2 Blue Acres sites. So could we apply for development on the Blue Acre sites to put in a canoe launch area? Because at Kirby's Mill, you have to cross a county road to get there. But now with the Blue Acre sites, if we put the canoe launch on the other side of the road and it still abuts the creek, it actually would make it safer for that activity.
Well, we should talk in more detail, because Blue Acres, if you're talking about state properties that are bought by the state for Blue Acres, there are limitations of what you can do there. So we should talk, but just as a general rule, park development projects and stewardship projects and all these projects need to be on land owned by the applicant, or that the applicant has a 25-year lease. So very often there are partnerships that happen because somebody owns the land, but somebody else wants to do the project, and that's fine. You work with us on getting an approvable lease in time for not in time for the application, but in time for the project to start. So if the state's the owner, you have to work that out if it's a local government or a nonprofit or the fire company or a private entity, that's fine. Leases are okay. We just have to be involved in the leasing and reviewing of the lease. But there are would be special conditions with the Blue Acres property. So we should probably talk about that separately.
Okay, and then the last question, because this part of the Rancocas involves another municipality, and I don't believe they're on this call, but can two municipalities apply? On the same application?
It's not the same application. They would each submit an application. It could be pretty much a duplicate
Okay.
if it's the exact same thing. But each project needs to stand alone, meaning each municipality submits the forms and the ROSI and all of that, and we have to make sure that our money, Green Acres funding, can never be a match to Green Acres funding.
Right.
So we can't give two entities funding and have our funds match each other.
Right, and you said stewardship is a 33% cap of the cost, correct?
No. We give stewardship grants are 50% or 75%, depending on where they are. Is that correct, CC? So 33%. 33% is there's a cap. 33% is there's a cap on the conditional facilities that you're going to the conditional.
Conditionally eligible
facilities that you want to build. That's the cap of 33%. If what you want to do is all completely eligible, that's fine. But you have to have completely eligible things if you want to put in some of the things that are only conditionally eligible.
Okay.
Sarah,
thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Martha. You touched in the chat on the question about nonprofits not required to hold public hearings. Could you expand on that a little bit? What would be what documentation would you need from a nonprofit in terms of the public engagement process?
Okay. Well, so there are two different things, and I think Cecile mentioned this earlier. We've always required public hearings. That's kind of at the end when you tell the public what you're planning to apply for. The public engagement is supposed to be at the beginning where you're coming up with the project itself. So public engagement, anybody can do. Nonprofit, local governments, anybody can do that as part of their project. And we need you to do that. It's important. The public hearing, nonprofits don't really hold public hearings. They have public notification requirements, so we want it to be on their website. They need to send notifications to the governing body, and they have to have an advertisement in the newspaper and on their website about the project. So there is still public engagement and public notification. It's just not for nonprofits, not a hearing itself.
It's not a hearing. Okay.
Yes, but somebody mentioned in the chat about partnerships, and if a town wants to have a public hearing about a project that a nonprofit is doing on their parkland, which was the example given, that's great. The more you talk to the public, the happier we are, because then there are no surprises. And we've been on the receiving end of many angry calls from residents saying, this is going to increase traffic, it's going to blah, blah, blah. They're spraying, pesticides, all these things that we didn't know. So we're trying to get away from the we didn't know part.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Madam Strobel.
Hello.
Adam, hello.
Just turning my stuff on. How are you?
Okay.
First of all, thank you very much for what you do. I fully appreciate it. I think we all do. You do an excellent job. Thank you for this work session and everything you provide to us. Very, very valuable. I have a question regarding the Jake's Law application, and I have three tiered questions, not very difficult. A couple are dealing with clarification. First, is there a narrative requirement for the Jake's Law application? In your normal park application, development application, there are requirements for a park development narrative having different factors and discussions.
No, because you may have missed the part where we said this is not competitive. If the counties apply and ask for an eligible, to do an eligible facility, you will be awarded. It's not competitive, so we don't need to rank it.
All right. So I guess what led to my question was dealing with your submitting a comprehensive application. You have like eight different points, some dealing with environmental justice, revitalization. So we're not addressing that in any way in our application.
DEP policy, policies and priorities are, just so you know, as you're devising any of your projects. I mean, if you want to put your Jake's Law completely inclusive playground in an adversely impacted, overburdened community, that's great, because you've seen that the department is doing that. So we put that in there so that you could gear your project ideally to where the people need it the most.
Oh, okay. I thank you for the clarification. All right. My second question is dealing with complying with DCA guidelines with the all-inclusive. What are you going to be doing in terms of reviewing these concept plans to say the concept plans meet the DCA requirements?
Yeah, we're still working on that.
Maybe
Okay,
I'll
good.
jump in. I can jump in here a little bit. The DCA regulations are actually they're amendments to the Uniform Construction Code. So that is administered through municipalities, as you know, often through the zoning officers or the code officers. So those are the people who are going to be ultimately determining whether it fits into those requirements and into the and so we are going to come up with a form, even just a signature line for when you submit plans that individual who reviews the Uniform Construction Code is going to sign off on. But we haven't figured it all out yet. But that's where we're headed.
Because you're not designing it for the application. You're saying we're going to be doing an completely inclusive playground, and we will follow that. And these are the things that we're going to put in there. But we're not asking you to have the spec.
Yeah.
You'll need to know the cost.
70% drawings or anything.
Yeah, you need to know what you're building basically. But yeah, as for that, they didn't give us. We don't have a cheat sheet about what exactly to look for. But because it's amending a law and that other people are responsible for, we're going to share that responsibility.
So you'll try to address that post-construction, I would presume?
No, pre-construction.
Pre-construction?
Yes. Sometime
when
between
when we submit the plans for
exactly.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. The last question is we are still required to do environmental impact assessments, which is found on page 26 for the property.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay.
Yes. It shouldn't be tough. I mean, it's
okay.
Hopefully we're not putting it in wetlands or anything, or creating hazards. So, okay. Eric?
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Sure. Eric?
Hi, am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
There was a few Erics, that's why.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, hi, Eric Person from the Powhatan Township Environmental Commission. We're in early stages. We have 2 parcels in town of approximately 2 acres each. They were former ball fields and they have not been in use for many years. So we're looking to redevelop those. A couple of things that our residents have found interest in are like dog parks and community gardens. So my question is, would those be if those were done within the scope of the development, would those be conforming to the application, those 2 particular items?
Dog parks and community gardens are eligible for funding.
Oh, well, that's good news. That was actually my only question. So thanks for answering, and I hopefully will be back in touch at some point. So,
excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Joseph Sabatini.
Hi, thank you. I'm the manager in Byram Township, and I'm trying to assess right now if I should be submitting an application this year or next year. So we're going to be finalizing the scope of a pretty major development project for one of our main parks in town. Meets all the criteria that you've identified for eligibility. It probably would fall under the traditional Green Acres application. At time, so I guess my question is more from a process perspective and application viewpoint. At time of application, we're not going to have really the complete design completed. We are going to need to petition the DEP for permits and whatnot, and that might influence some of the elements of the project. So my question for you is this an application that we should be submitting this year, or should we be working more towards next year?
No, now, I mean, you would be so much farther along than anybody. Matter of fact, if you get
Okay.
too far along, you might disqualify yourself because
Oh, okay.
we have something called an at-risk authorization for if you need to move very quickly before we can catch up with you to keep you eligible. But in this case, now is the time to do it because normally when you submit the application, you're submitting just a concept plan. You're still
Okay.
figuring out exactly what you want to do. You have some, we ask you to have consultations and figure out what permits you're going to need. You don't need permits in hand. We don't want you to spend that kind of money because you might not get funded. So you're well ahead of everybody else, and I would do it this year as opposed to next because we don't want you to get too far ahead.
So there was something I remember hearing, and maybe I confused it with the other funding options, but if there was a major change in scope of project, it could create an issue for us.
Yes, after the fact. Unfortunately, we've had applicants who apply for, everything, and then they come back later and they say, oh, we're only going to do half of it. But they got points for all of it. Or they come in and they say, we said we were going to do a swimming pool, but now we're going to do ball fields instead. I mean, that's just so totally different than what you were scored for. And that's not fair because there were applicants that round that didn't get funding because we thought you were going to build what you said you were going to build. And you also told the public that. So we used to try to be, again, flexible, but it just isn't, realized it's not fair to swap things out after the fact. So that's why I want you to plan your project, talk to the public, design it to be what they want, understand how much it's going to cost, and then stick with that project. We understand we might not fully fund you, so you might need to adjust the scope or phase it, but we just can't allow major changes in scope after approval.
And if you when you're saying that you don't have permits yet, going through the permitting process usually involves some changes to a project scope, but a lot of times those changes are not maximum, they're minimal. They're, move this trail over here because it's, too close to this tree with the eagle nest, it's not, do a totally different park than the one you applied for. So if you have gone through the planning process in-house and with your community to come up with a park plan, and the only thing you don't have is DEP permits, then that's definitely ready for an application.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't, we're not going to change the main scope of the project, but, we might get into the permitting and the drainage plan that we initially thought might need to be changed.
Mm-hmm.
May or may not, I mean, I don't think that we're going to get fully funded. I'm looking at a project that's probably a minimum $1.5 million. So, I expect there's going to be municipal funding. It's one of our Rossi properties. So, and you guys funded many years ago an expansion at our park. So this is kind of going to be the third expansion on that park that we did. So that's in general, the overall concept of the project's not going to change. It just might be certain elements within it that might have to change based on permitting requirements. So I would assume that's okay.
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate your time and thank you very much.
Sure. Adam, is your hand back up or is that still up? I'm going to assume it's okay. So Eric. Okay, I'm trying to see who's still there. Frank Battaglia?
Thank you. Yes. I'm with the Shade Tree Committee of Atlantic City, and I have one very specific question about fencing, but I might as well describe the project because you might have some advice about which direction to head. Now, there is a city park which was originally created for people lost at sea. It adjoins the bay of Absecon Island, and it was inundated in Sandy. So there have been public meetings. It's next to two OBC communities, and there've been one of those communities has been having meetings about this for some time. So we have slowly developing plans to create pollinator gardens along a built-in seawall, have wildlife educational displays, And these folks would like to have passive rather than active recreation in the restored park. The specific question is that one end of the park has lost its fencing. Would a Green Acres grant cover the replacement of fencing is the specific question I needed an answer to. And if you have any general advice about how the ward organization should be steering to make an application, I'd be happy to have it.
Okay, well, fencing is eligible as part of the project. It needs to be part of a larger project because that alone would not rank high enough to get anything. Are you suggesting that Atlantic City would be applying?
Well, I was thinking that the appropriate originator would be the ward organization, which sometimes does things under a 501(c) of a community college there. So that's the path we were thinking it was appropriate to take. Can the city apply for funding directly?
I'm afraid not this round,
Yes.
but you should reach out to Bruce Beckloff, who is the contact listed in the application, and he can help you through figuring out whether or not a community college isn't generally our nonprofits have to be charitable conservancies, which means that they are not only a 501(c)(3), but they have to have as one of their major goals, purposes, preservation of land.
Gotcha.
And a community college generally isn't. If the ward organization is, then we can talk about it. But you can get into the details of eligibility with Bruce, and he can guide you.
Okay, and I can get an application form by going back to the Green Acres site.
Yes, on the front page, there's a spot.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, Linda Mead.
Thank you. This is my second meeting with you today, and thank you for doing the job. So my question is a simple one about the nonprofit stewardship grants. So with nonprofits, we don't always need to do public bidding to implement with a contractor and hire a contractor. Is there a requirement with the stewardship grant to do a public bidding process, or is there a threshold, like a financial threshold over which we need to do a public bidding process?
Well, everyone who receives our funding, nonprofits included, have to comply with the local public contracts law. And there are different thresholds in that law for sometimes where it needs bidding versus quotes. It depends on what you're doing, but there are certain levels, certain limits and levels. So we can guide you through that, but you will need an attorney to sign off that it complies. So they could give you the guidance as to to interpret the local public contracts law, but you could also reach out to us to give examples of what you think it might cost and what you think you might need to do. But yes, with our public funding, you will need to comply with the bidding law, even though it doesn't always require bidding.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, the hands that are up are people we already spoke to, I think. Joseph Sabatini, Adam Strobel, Eric Parasin, and Frank Battaglia. So I don't see any additional questions.
No, I'm done.
I'm sorry?
My hand's down.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's still showing. No, it's weird. It's okay. Diane,
Martha,
Dion?
is there a new one?
Dion?
A new person?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. How are you?
Hi.
So I just had a couple of questions. I'm giving you a call from Willingboro Township. Mr. Brunson did ask a couple of the questions. So with regards to the stewardship, and we have a Futura house, if some are familiar with that, and we actually applied for eligibility to become part of the Historic Preservation Office. Would funding be available if we were looking to restore the Futura house because it is a historic site?
We do have some funding available. Generally, our funding doesn't go for the bricks and mortar type things. As a matter of fact, if it's eligible for listing on the State Register of Historic Places, which I think is what you're talking about, you also might want to talk to the Historic Trust about grants to the actual structure. We can do some of that. It kind of, and we can certainly do some outside work. Urban parks funding can be used for historic preservation. So that's an extra avenue for you if it's the Willingboro's urban aid, if it's in an adversely stressed, overburdened community. So I would suggest you reach out. Is it now Vincenzo? Okay, Vincenzo Ferriola, his name is on the list. You can reach out to him and we can all work together to talk about the different funding opportunities that you might have for that.
Okay, and then my second question is, I know when we're talking about changing the scope of work. So if we have multiple projects in the area, so behind the building that we currently sit in, we have a area where we're looking at turf field. We also have pickleball courts and a ball field. Is that something that we can include all in one application, or that would be different?
No, they're two different. It seems like it's two different types of projects. So
Okay.
I can't tell if it's all the same property or not.
It is. It's the same in the same area right behind where we actually have our building. So we have a field that we were looking into getting turf field across the way. There's old tennis courts that we were looking to turn into pickleball courts. And then we also have a ball field that's kind of like adjacent to that as well.
Yeah, they're very different. It's very different. So let's talk about that in more specifics, because generally a park development project is a site, but it's normally more cohesive than that. Maybe we can figure it out, but let's talk offline about that because it's so unique. Historic preservation and ball fields normally aren't sort of in the same project.
Okay. Yeah, and I was actually talking about like the historic preservation in a different application, not everything being combined together.
Oh, okay.
But I'm talking about those just being separate, but just looking at the scope of the different things, because there's so many different things that we can kind of do. So we're just trying to narrow down because we have a dog park as well, and all of those things. So
yeah, so you have to pick one traditional project, Green Acres project. So park development's that. If you wanted to do the historic preservation one under urban parks, but you have to select. So let's talk offline to make sure that you, again, know which opportunities are available to you and you don't oversubscribe yourself and then end up not being able to get funded.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, Aubrey?
Hi. Okay, so quick question. This is about the stewardship application. I know that you mentioned the ADA compliance requirement, for parks. For us, this is for Closter Nature Center, which is in Bergen County. There's the project that they're looking at, which is, it's going to impact trails and, preservation and whatnot. So how does that requirement lend to stewardship? Just to understand, like, how does it impact, if we have existing trails, if they have the ADA compliant, if they're part of this project, just so that I understand that.
Okay, well, actually, Green Acres doesn't impose the ADA requirement. It's a requirement of public funding. So even if the Closter was to build it themselves, they'd have to comply with the ADA. It doesn't mean that every trail has to be paved and barrier free. It just means that, but the law has very specific parameters and exceptions and things, and so you'd need to look at that. But it's not a Green Acres requirement. It's just that it's one of the things that we thought was important enough to keep mentioning it as you're designing it. But any public funding that you're using, so the stewardship project would have to still comply with the ADA. It just might not mean that the typical thing that it could mean in terms of paving and that.
Right. Okay. All right. So I'll look into that for more information. I was just like, how does this apply? A lot of our trails are not ADA. So understanding how it's going to impact the full scope of the project is really helpful. So thank you.
Sure. Jacqueline?
Hi, thank you so much. I have my question on the chat so we could remove it from that. New York, New Jersey Trail Conference. This is at the eligibility level, so it's just that high level. I'm just going to read from an excerpt that I had written down from, I'm not sure if I had read it in parks or stewardship, because we're looking at both. Since the number of project applications typically exceeds available funding, the Green Acres program will only consider funding requests from new applicants or from applicants making significant progress on open projects and following Green Acres rules on their parkland. because we have received funding from you in the past. And so when I saw this, I wanted to check on that.
Sure. No, this is basically if you have too many open projects and you're not making progress on them, we don't really want to put another one on top of that. Or if you have a serious compliance problem, you've diverted parkland and you're not cooperating in terms of fixing that problem, we're not going to give you more funding. So that's just an overall thing that if you're being naughty, we're not going to put more money into that. But it doesn't matter that you've had projects in the past. That's great. We'd love to have you back.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Sure. There were other questions in the chat that I didn't see. Someone said, with regards to the Rosie, how recently does it need to have been updated? As recently as the last time you added land to it. So if you haven't bought anything new in a couple of years, that's fine. You don't have to update it, but we need to know that there's not any new land that should be on it.
Yeah, the signatures need to be within the last 12 months.
Yeah. That's it. Okay. But it could be the exact same document. It could be the same listing because nothing's been added. So, so Kelly, thank you mentioned there's a question about refunding facilities. If we have previously funded a park and you're coming back to us and you want to redo it, we generally say you have to wait 20 years. There are some exceptions if you can show that the facility itself has been so overused because of demand, not because it was poorly designed or not maintained, that we can talk to you about it. But generally, we don't refund a facility within 20 years of funding it. We expect that what we fund will be maintained for basically a generation, which is 20 to 25 years, which is why we need the leases to be that long. So someone asked about how to get in touch with me. I am on the website. My address, my email address, and my phone number on the website. How often do these Green Acres funding rounds come about? Is there a set timetable? No, we haven't had one for 2 years, but we are now, the plan now is to have one every year. Can we apply for supplemental funding for a new playground in one park and a pickleball court in another park? No, unfortunately, we are not doing multi-parks anymore. Again, as Cecile mentioned earlier, our history has shown that they just don't all get done, and then it just ends up skewing the ranking, which isn't really fair. So it's one park at a time. Someone asked, through which program can a university work with an eligible local government to support green infrastructure implementation as part of the project to create I guess it's usable recreation facility? Can it be applied through park development? So a university can't apply to us, but a university can help an eligible applicant apply, with a project and apply to us. We don't dictate who prepares the application. So very often it's the public can prepare it. A consultant can prepare it. I mean, there are certain forms that need certain signatures on it, but basically, if there's a university that can help you plan and complete the application, that's great. But the eligible applicant has to be the one that is authorized to apply. Green infrastructure is also one of those iffy kind of things, and you really need to talk to us in advance if you're thinking about doing that. In general, green infrastructure can work on parkland, but there are certain kinds of facilities like that could be in a gray area in terms of whether it's a diversion or not. So in general, it sounds great, but please, anything like that, please talk to us about it first. And someone said, I guess it's talking about the Rosie. It doesn't include conservation easements, just those properties that have public access. I'm thinking they mean the Rosie. You need to have properties that, for municipalities and counties, land that you own in fee simple or have a conservation easement on them, even if there is no public access, because the point is, if it's held for recreation and conservation purposes, it belongs on there. A lot of times there's privately owned land, but the town, maybe through a subdivision or whatever, has been given a conservation easement without access. That's okay, but that easement still has to be listed because it's held. That interest is held by the town or county.
Martha, it looks like Wendy Mager has another question.
I do. Yeah, so the one is, I just want to be clear. So for a nonprofit application, we're not required to submit the ROSI, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and then this is a little off topic. I apologize. It has to do with acquisition funding, but you just said something very interesting, Martha, which was that with regard to these funding programs, if you're a municipality and you had a diversion that you're not working, you know, with us to correct, we don't want to give you money, or something to that effect. So Princeton, which is where the nonprofit I'm associated with is located, had a diversion. They've been working very diligently for months with Maud Snyder on plans to compensate for that diversion. But I think they are under the impression not just that they can't get Green Acres money to help purchase the property that will compensate for the diversion, which is obvious, but that they can't apply for any Green Acres funding for any property in this funding round because they have this unresolved diversion. Is that right, or is that wrong?
Well, we sent letters out in October to a number of municipalities and counties that either have 3 or more open projects or have an outstanding diversion problem or compliance problem that they're not actively working to address, or both. There are some that have both. And we told those applicants in October that they had to close out enough projects to only have 2 to apply for funding, or they had to make significant progress on the compliance problem in order to be eligible. So I'd have to look to see if Princeton received one of those. If they did, that's where they got that impression. And I would just wait to hear from Maud that they've now made significant progress and are eligible. I don't know that answer off the top of my head, but we're not, it's not a surprise thing. We let everybody know back in October that you have until the next deadline to address these issues. And the 3 or more projects is just a capacity issue. We just find too many towns, the accumulated projects, and they're spread too thin. So we're saying just take a break this round, close out some projects that you already have, and then apply next round. With the compliance problems, basically, if you're parkland and not working to address it, we don't want to give you more funding until you address it. We have towns and counties that have diversions, but they're working on them, so they didn't get that letter. It's just really if it's something stalled, and so that's the kind of thing.
And Wendy, I did look it up, and Princeton is not on the list, so they did not get a letter, and they're eligible to apply.
Thank you so much.
Sure. So it doesn't look like anybody else. Well, Adam still has his hand raised, Jacqueline and Wendy, but that's it. Have hands raised.
Oh, I'll put my hand down.
Okay, let me see if I think Adam's fallen asleep and he forgot to take his hand down.
Oh, so. No, I'm not asleep. I've been trying to remove the hand. I can't figure it out. So
okay.
This is my last question I'll ever look. It went away. Who put that?
It went away. Yay!
I didn't do that. Who's playing games with me? You people.
Okay, let me look in the chat and see if there are any other unanswered questions. Wendy asked this question. We got the question from Sam in Hudson County answered. I think all the questions in the chat have now been answered. Somebody did point out that even though we're saying you don't have to submit the tax maps with the ROSI, there's still a column that says map key number, because we used to ask for you to have your ROSI properties on a map as well and do that. That map, if you want to submit it, that's great. It helps us see where there's an open space deficit in your town, which helps tell the story of why something is needed, or there's a park deficit. We want to see, it shows us that, but it's no longer required. Okay, so we have somebody else, I think, had just raised their hand and then lowered it.
I think there's a new chat question.
Okay. One question is a project that was funded for outdoor playground equipment. Can you apply for renovation of a building in that same park? A new application? Yes. I mean, I don't know that renovation of a building alone is going to rank very high. And of course, the building has to be in support of the outdoor recreation, but it is eligible. The fact that we previously funded a park does not mean that we won't go back and fund other things at the park.
Yeah, the concern comes when we've funded the particular facility within 20 years. Or another thing that we see sometimes is applicants come in and they want to put a new facility on the exact location where we funded a different facility within the last 20 years. And that also is a problem. But if it's a completely different facility in the same park, then that's fine. All right, someone's asking about public hearing requirements. I mean, I think the best way is to look at the application or to reach out to your project contact. The list is in on our website, as I showed you with, remember the red arrow? Can't forget that red arrow. But they're asking Martha if you could send your contact information.
I just did. I just posted
Okay.
my contact information for anybody who wants to reach out to me directly, or I'll even put my phone number. Here's my phone number. You can do it either way.
We have a question. Oh, actually, we have a person with their hand up. Diane?
Diane? Diane Jansen?
Yes, I attended this morning's session, which was excellent, as well as this afternoon's session. And I was wondering, how soon will these be online for sharing within our communities?
You mean this slideshow or this recording?
Yes.
Okay, so we are going to post both, just so you know, because sometimes people don't want to rewatch the whole thing, but the slides were enough to give you information. So we're going to post the slides and the recordings of both this morning's session and this afternoon's session on our website, hopefully tomorrow or the next day.
Oh, thank you so much. Much appreciated. Bye-bye.
No problem. Anybody else? We can't stress enough that we want you to reach out to us. If you are not bothering us, this is what we're here for. We want you to have a great application. We want you to have a great project. We want you to be successful. So please, please, please reach out to us. Don't worry about reaching out to the wrong person. Go to the list. If it's like we said, if it's the wrong person, we'll send you the right people. We all sit very close to each other. But we really would love to answer your questions and guide you in the right direction. So if there are no other questions, I think we're just under the time, but we are, if not, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. We just need to end the recording.